Welcome to the Tank Guide Life podcast, a product of FishKeepingLifeCo. So I have a somewhat terrifying fact for you right out of the gate. That glass box of water sitting in your living room right now is just, well, it is teeming with thousands of invisible algae spores.
Oh, absolutely. Thousands. Probably more.
Right, and they're just suspended in the water column, they're resting on your substrate, they're clinging to the glass, and no matter how much you bleach or boil or scrub your hardscape, you can never get rid of them.
Never.
But, and here's the crazy part, today we're going to tell you why that is actually the best news you could possibly get.
Yeah, I know it sounds incredibly counterintuitive, doesn't it? I mean, the instinct for anyone who has ever stared down a tank that's just covered in green fuzz is to view those microscopic spores as a plague.
Oh, totally. It feels like an invasion.
Right. But that mindset, the idea that you are at war with an invisible invader, that is exactly what drives most people out of the aquarium hobby entirely.
Yeah.
We have to completely dismantle that perspective today.
And if you're listening to this deep dive right now, and you're staring at a prized Amazon sword plant that is just choking under a slimy, brown, stringy mess, and your blood pressure is spiking, we hear you. Take a deep breath.
Seriously, relax the shoulders.
We're here to lower that blood pressure. This deep dive is actually part one of a special two-part series, and our entire mission today is to deconstruct what algae actually is, like dive into the biology of why it blooms and give you the foundational framework for managing it without tearing your hair out or, throwing the whole tank out the window.
Please don't throw the tank.
Yeah.
It is all about building a foundational understanding of the ecosystem because, honestly, if you don't understand the biology happening at a microscopic level, you are just guessing.
Just throwing spaghetti at the wall.
Exactly. You are throwing chemicals at a symptom. And then, once we have this ecosystem framework established today, part two is going to be a highly specialized masterclass dedicated entirely to the final boss of the aquarium world.
Oh man, the dreaded blackbeard algae.
Yes, BBA. It deserves its own entire deep dive.
It really does. Just the name blackbeard algae makes me want to do a massive water change right now.
Yeah.
But we will hold off on the final boss. Today is about the foundation. So I want to start by addressing the elephant in the room, which is the sheer panic people feel.
The panic is so real.
It is. I've been reading through dozens of forum threads this week, and the pervasive advice for a beginner seeing their first algae bloom is to immediately run to the store, buy a liquid carbon algicide with a literal warning label on it, and just aggressively nuke the tank.
Which fundamentally violates the entire FishKeepingLifeCo philosophy.
Right.
I mean, when you pour a highly reactive chemical into a closed glass box to execute one specific organism, you are sending a massive biological shockwave through the entire system.
You're not just hitting the algae.
No, not at all. You are impacting the nitrifying bacteria, the cellular walls of your higher plants, the gills of your fish, and the super delicate biological systems of your invertebrates. We really have to move away from the allure of chemical warfare.
Okay, but I am going to push back on that right out of the gate.
Go for it.
Because I am looking at a highly upvoted thread from a veteran aquarist who absolutely swears by the blackout and nuke method. They claim that if you just kill the algae off completely, you reset the tank. Are they just getting lucky? Or is there a biological reason that kind of scorched earth tactic might temporarily work?
Well, the key word there is temporarily. They are getting a cosmetic result at the expense of long-term biological stability.
So it's just a Band-Aid.
Worse than a Band-Aid. Sure, if you shut off the lights for a week and pour in algicide, the algae will die. But you haven't changed the environmental variables that allowed the algae to bloom in the first place.
The root cause is still there.
Exactly. Plus, now you have a massive amount of decaying organic matter. The dead algae itself rotting in your tank, that spikes your ammonia, severely stresses your plants, and usually triggers an even worse bloom of a completely different algae a week later. You haven't reset the tank, you've just loaded a spring.
You're treating the symptom, not the disease.
Precise.
So before we can even talk about managing the environment, we need to know our enemy. Or, well, as you hinted at earlier, our misunderstood roommate. When I look at that green smear on the glass, what is actually happening biologically? Because it feels like a parasitic infection.
We really need to reframe that immediately. Algae is not an infection.
Okay.
It is an ancient, omnipresent, and deeply foundational part of the aquatic environment. Biologically speaking, the term algae is a massive, somewhat clumsy umbrella term for an incredibly diverse group of photosynthetic organisms.
So it's not just one specific weed.
No, we are talking about everything from microscopic single-celled organisms floating in the water column all the way up to highly complex multicellular structures that basically mimic the morphology of higher plants.
Wow, okay, so it's a whole category of life.
A massively broad category. In the freshwater hobby, you are generally looking at three major biological divisions. You have the chlorophyta, which are your green algae.
Right, the classic green stuff.
Then you have the bacillariophyta, which are the diatoms, those brown, dusty patches you see in new tanks.
Oh yeah, the brown dust.
And you have the rhodophyta, or red algae, which ironically includes the very dark, tufty blackbeard algae we mentioned earlier.
Wait, blackbeard is a red algae.
It is. Biology is funny like that.
Yeah.
And then critically, you have cyanobacteria, which constantly gets lumped into the algae conversation, but is technically a photosynthetic bacteria.
I want to pause on cyanobacteria because that honestly blew my mind when I was reading the source material. It is an imposter.
Total imposter.
It's wearing an algae disguise. We will definitely dig deep into the mechanics of cyano later, but what really sticks with me is the omnipresence you mentioned. Are you saying that literally no matter what I do, even if I boil my driftwood, bake my sand, and bleach dip every single plant before it goes in the tank, I will still have algae?
100%.
That is wild.
You cannot sterilize an aquarium against algae, and honestly, if you tried, you would destroy the very microbial life that makes keeping fish possible in the first place. Algae spores are in the tap water you use.
Just right out of the faucet.
Right out of the faucet. They are floating in the ambient air of your living room, just settling on the water's surface. They are microscopic and highly resilient.
The analogy I keep coming back to is household dust.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, dust is just a reality of living on Earth, right? It's almost floating in the air, invisible. You're breathing it right now. But you only view your house as dirty when that dust is allowed to accumulate into a thick, visible layer on your bookshelf because, well, you haven't been wiping it down or managing your air circulation.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. The algae spores are the dust. They are always in the room. But they only become visible, they only synthesize enough biomass to turn into that green fuzz on your glass or that stringy mess on your plants when the environmental conditions heavily favor their accumulation over the higher plants.
But why does it feel like such a personal indictment? Like, if it's as natural as dust, why has the hobby historically framed a patch of green hair algae as a massive failure of cleanliness on the part of the fish keeper?
Because for decades, the hobby really lacked a deep understanding of aquatic botany. We treated aquariums like sterile swimming pools rather than living ecosystems.
Right, trying to bleach everything white.
Exactly. But here is the ultimate reframe. If you take nothing else away from this deep dive, take this concept. Algae is a dashboard light.
Like the check engine light in a car.
Exactly that. It is a real-time, highly sensitive biological indicator. I mean, when your car's check engine light comes on, you don't take a hammer and smash the dashboard to make the light go away.
Well, hopefully not.
Hopefully not. You recognize that the light is providing a diagnostic readout telling you that something under the hood, your oil, your transmission, is fundamentally out of balance. Algae is doing the exact same thing for your aquarium.
It's just communicating.
Yes. It is communicating in real time that there is an imbalance in your light energy, your nutrient availability, your dissolved carbon dioxide, or your flow dynamics.
I absolutely love that framework. It completely removes the emotion, the guilt, and the panic. It's not a moral failing. It's just ecological data. The tank is speaking to you.
Beautifully put.
So let's pop the hood. If algae is just an indicator light, what are the actual mechanical drivers turning that light on?
When we dissect these drivers, we need to abandon the idea of excess and focus entirely on imbalance.
Imbalance, okay.
It is almost never a case of simply having too much of one thing.
Yeah.
It is a disconnect between what the environment is providing and what the higher aquatic plants are currently capable of consuming.
Let's start with the big one, the engine of the whole system, light.
Right. Light is the raw energy that drives photosynthesis. Both your complex aquatic plants and your primitive algae use light energy to convert dissolved carbon dioxide and nutrients into physical biomass.
So they're eating the same thing.
They are. But the biological difference in how they process that light is where the battle is won or lost.
Break that down for us. Because from a layman's perspective, light is just light. You turn it on, things grow.
It comes down to biological complexity and adaptation time. Aquatic plants are incredibly complex organisms. They have intricate cellular structures, root systems, specialized internal machinery.
They're highly evolved.
Very much so. So if you change the lighting environment, say you increase the intensity, or PAR, which stands for photosynthetically active radiation, the plant cannot utilize that extra energy immediately.
Well, interesting.
It takes days or even weeks for a higher plant to physically grow new specialized leaves to process a higher photon load.
So it has a really slow biological clock.
Very slow. Algae, on the other hand, is primitive. It is largely single-celled or simple filamentous structures. It doesn't have to grow a root system or a complex leaf.
It just exists.
It just exists, and it can adapt and react to changes in light intensity almost instantaneously. So if you blast a tank with massive amounts of unused energy light, that your plants are biologically incapable of processing, yet that energy becomes an open, all-you-can-eat buffet.
And the algae is the first one in line.
The algae is the only organism at the table.
Wow. I've fallen down the forum rabbit hole on this one, I have to admit. I spent weeks trying to tweak the individual color channels on my LED app. Dropping the red spectrum, boosting the blue, trying to somehow starve the algae of its favorite color. Is there any truth to spectral manipulation?
It is one of the most persistent and distracting myths in modern fish keeping.
Really? So the color tweaking does nothing?
The idea that a specific magical combination of red and blue light will somehow defeat algae is scientifically hollow. Both plants and algae utilize the same general photosynthetic spectrum. What matters infinitely more than the spectral composition is the stability of the photoperiod.
You mean the actual routine of when the lights turn on and off?
Yes. Plants deeply crave routine. They actually anticipate the light cycle.
Like waking up before your alarm clock.
Exactly like that. If your lights turn on at 9 a.m. one day and 1 p.m. the next, or stay on for 6 hours on Tuesday and 12 hours on Thursday, the higher plants are thrown into a state of metabolic chaos.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
They spend all their stored energy just trying to adjust their internal circadian rhythms. And while the plants are stunned and offline, the algae, which couldn't care less about biological clocks, just thrives on the chaos.
Get a digital timer.
Sure.
Set it, leave it alone. That is such a simple, actionable takeaway.
It's step one.
Okay, so we have light as the raw energy. Let's look at the next core driver, and this is where I really want to dig into the chemistry. Nutrient dynamics.
This is a big one.
It is, because I am going back to the forums here, and the conventional wisdom, like the absolute loudest advice you hear is that algae is caused by too many nutrients. The logical step, therefore, is to aggressively starve the tank by stopping all fertilizers, right?
It sounds perfectly logical to the human brain, and it is entirely catastrophically wrong biologically.
Catastrophically wrong. Okay, why?
To understand why starving the tank is a massive trap, we have to look at the chemistry of what plants actually require to build cellular structures. Both plants and algae require a highly specific menu of elements.
We're talking about the macros and micros.
Correct. The macronutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, often abbreviated as NPK.
NPK, right.
Then you have the micronutrients, which include heavy lifters like iron, magnesium, and various trace elements. Now, because both plants and algae require these exact same building blocks, people assume that dumping less food in the water starves the algae.
But the algae requires a tiny fraction of what a massive Amazon sword plant requires, doesn't it?
Exactly. And this introduces a fundamental principle of biology called Liebig's law of the minimum.
I love this concept. Let's unpack Liebig's law, because once you understand this, the whole nutrient argument makes perfect sense.
Okay, picture a wooden barrel constructed from different vertical planks of wood.
Like an old wine barrel.
Right. Some of those planks are tall, but some are cut short. The total volume of water that barrel can hold is not determined by the tallest planks. It is strictly dictated by the shortest plank.
Because the water just pours out over the short one.
Exactly. The water will simply spill out over the lowest point, regardless of how high the other planks go.
So in a biological system, the shortest plank limits the growth of the entire organism.
Precisely. In your aquarium, those wooden planks represent your nutrients. Let's imagine a scenario where your tank has incredibly bright light, abundant nitrogen, and high phosphorus.
Okay, sounds good so far.
But you stopped fertilizing, and your system has completely run out of potassium. Potassium is now your shortest plank.
Uh-oh.
The very second your aquatic plant exhausts its internal potassium reserves, it hits a biological brick wall. The cellular machinery that opens and closes its leaf pores the stomata fails. The plant stalls out completely.
It just stops growing even though it's swimming in nitrogen and phosphorus.
It halts entirely. And when the plant stalls, it stops consuming the light energy. It stops absorbing the nitrogen. It stops taking up the phosphorus.
Oh, I see where this is going.
So suddenly you have an environment flooded with high light, excess nitrogen, and excess phosphorus that your higher plants are no longer touching.
And because algae is so primitive, it doesn't need nearly as much potassium to survive. So it just happily steps in and consumes this massive feast of leftover nitrogen and light.
You've nailed the mechanism. That is exactly why dropping your fertilizers to 0 is a disaster. You are virtually guaranteeing that your higher plants will run out of a crucial element, hit that shortest plank, and stall.
Which hands the keys over to the algae.
Exactly. The moment your plants stall, they lose their competitive dominance. This is why advanced aquarists often use systems like the estimative index, or EI dosing, where they intentionally flood the water column with a slight excess of every single nutrient.
Wait, they intentionally overdose fertilizers? That sounds terrifying to a beginner.
It does, but the biological logic is sound. By ensuring that there is always a slight surplus of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and trace elements, they guarantee that the plant never hits a short plank.
The barrel is always full.
The plant never stalls. It grows vigorously and continuously. And a vigorously growing plant is an absolute biological powerhouse. It will actively outcompete algae for resources. The best algicide on the planet is a thriving, rapidly growing aquatic plant.
That is a massive paradigm shift. You aren't fertilizing to feed the algae, you are arming your plants so they can win the turf war.
Exactly. You're giving your army the supplies it needs.
Let's talk about the third driver, which is basically the structural foundation of that turf war. Carbon availability, specifically dissolved carbon dioxide.
Carbon is the physical building block of all organic life. In an aquarium, carbon is primarily accessed through dissolved CO2.
And this is where we see a huge division in the hobby, right? Between low-tech tanks, which rely entirely on the natural gas exchange at the water surface, and high-tech tanks, where hobbyists inject pressurized CO2 gas directly into the water.
Yes, that's the big divide. And whether you inject it or not, carbon is a massive driver of stability.
But why is it so closely linked to algae blooms?
Because of the complex enzymes required to process it. Let's look at the mechanism. Plants use an enzyme called rubisco to capture carbon dioxide and turn it into sugars.
Rubisco. Sounds like a biscuit brand.
It does, but it's actually a notoriously inefficient enzyme. So if you are injecting CO2 and providing a massive abundance of carbon, the plant physically alters its cellular structure to build specific transport mechanisms for that high CO2 environment.
It gets lazy, in a way, because the carbon is so easy to grab.
That's a great way to look at it. But what happens if your CO2 cylinder runs out while you're at work?
Yeah.
Or your bubble counter fluctuates?
The levels drop.
Suddenly, the dissolved carbon levels plummet. The plant is left holding all this high CO2 machinery in a low CO2 environment. It cannot photosynthesize. It goes offline.
Wow.
It takes a higher aquatic plant days, sometimes weeks, to physically dismantle its old enzymes and build new ones adapted to a low-carbon environment.
And let me guess, algae doesn't use the same clunky rubisco machinery.
Algae is remarkably efficient. Many forms of algae possess highly advanced carbon concentrating mechanisms. If the CO2 drops, the algae barely notices. It just shifts gears instantly.
Unbelievable.
So during that week-long window where your complex plants are paralyzed and trying to rebuild their enzymes, the algae is fully operational, soaking up all the light and nutrients the plants are ignoring.
That paints such a vivid picture of the microscopic turf war. Every time the plants stumble because of a light timer glitch, a missed fertilizer dose, or a CO2 swing, the algae rushes in to claim the abandoned resources.
It never sleeps.
Which brings us naturally to the fourth driver, flow and circulation. How do the resources actually get to the front lines of the turf war?
Flow is fundamentally about delivery and export. Aquatic plants are stationary. They cannot hunt for food. They are entirely dependent on water velocity to bring dissolved nutrients and carbon directly across their leaf surfaces.
I've always thought of flow as the cardiovascular system of the tank. The water current is the blood. It delivers the oxygen and the nutrients, and it carries away the toxic waste products.
That's a very accurate model.
But you're talking about something even more microscopic than just general current, right?
Yes, we need to talk about fluid dynamics, specifically the boundary layer.
The boundary layer, okay.
Around every single object submerged in water, including every leaf of your aquatic plants, there is a microscopic layer of perfectly still, stagnant water. This is the boundary layer.
Like a little invisible force field.
Exactly. If the water flow in your tank is weak, that boundary layer becomes thick. The plant leaf quickly consumes the nutrients immediately touching it, but because the boundary layer is thick and stagnant, new nutrients cannot penetrate it. The plant starves even if the surrounding water is full of fertilizer.
That is fascinating. So strong flow literally physically rips away that stagnant boundary layer, forcing fresh nutrients directly against the cellular wall of the leaf.
Exactly. When you have an area of the tank with poor flow, say a dense thicket of stem plants in the back corner, or behind a large piece of hardscape, you create what we call a dead zone.
And in a dead zone, the plants stall.
The boundary layers are thick, the plants stall from localized starvation.
And what else is happening in that dead zone? Because flow isn't just about delivery, it's about export.
Solid waste, uneaten fish food, fish excrement, decaying plant matter, it all settles out of the water column and drops into those low-flow areas.
It just collects there like dust under a sofa.
Yes. As this organic matter decays, it is broken down by heterotrophic bacteria, which consumes massive amounts of oxygen and releases localized spikes of raw ammonia.
So in a dead zone, you have highly weakened, starving plants sitting right on top of a rotting pile of ammonia-producing waste.
It is the perfect microscopic storm for an algae outbreak. Primitive algae spores are highly sensitive to trace amounts of ammonia. In fact, many botanists believe that a tiny spike in ammonia is the primary biological trigger that signals an algae spore to wake up and bloom.
Wow, just that little spike of ammonia acts as an alarm clock?
Yes. You will constantly see forum posts from people saying, you know, my water test's perfectly clean, but this one specific rock in the corner is smothered in dark fuzz.
Right.
That is almost always a flow issue. The check engine light is blinking, telling you to adjust your filter output or add a circulation pump.
Which flows perfectly into our fifth and final core driver, organic load and biological competition. We just touched on the rotting waste in dead zones, but organic load is a broader ecosystem concept, isn't it?
It is the ultimate test of your ecosystem's resilience. Organic load refers to the total accumulation of decomposing biological material in your system. We are talking about the detritus deep in your gravel bed, the sludge building up in your filter tubes, the dead leaves melting at the back of the tank.
And why does a high organic load specifically trigger an algae bloom? Is it just the ammonia?
It is the ammonia, but it is also about chemical instability and oxygen depletion. The microbial community in your tank, the beneficial bacteria, has to work incredibly hard to process that rotting sludge. This process consumes dissolved oxygen.
It's breathing heavily, essentially.
Exactly. If your organic load gets too high, your bacteria become overwhelmed, oxygen levels drop, and the chemical stability of the water column begins to oscillate.
And as we've established, higher plants despise oscillation.
They absolutely hate it. Furthermore, certain forms of algae, particularly the cyanobacteria we mentioned earlier, thrive in high organic, low oxygen environments. When the organic load stresses the system, the biological competition shifts.
The plants tap out.
The higher plants weaken, the beneficial bacteria struggle, and the opportunistic algae capitalizes on the instability.
Okay, so we've looked under the hood. We understand the drivers. We've got light intensity and duration, nutrient balance and Liebig's law, carbon stability, the fluid dynamics of flow, and the microbial stress of organic load.
The big five.
Right. If any one of those pillars cracks, the algae dashboard light comes on. But not all dashboard lights look the same. I mean, the low tire pressure light looks different than the check engine light.
And that is where diagnosis becomes critical. The visual form the algae takes gives you massive clues about which driver is failing.
Let's walk through a diagnostic conversation. Let's say I'm a listener, and I'm looking at a light green dust forming on the front glass of my aquarium, and maybe some tiny green spots on the older leaves of my anubias. I'm assuming my tank is failing.
Paradoxically, you should be celebrating.
Celebrating.
Yes. Green algae, whether it's green dust algae or green spot algae, is actually a biological indicator that your core parameters are highly capable of sustaining life. It means your tank has adequate light energy and a functioning nutrient cycle.
So I shouldn't be reaching for the panic button over some green dust.
Absolutely not. It is entirely manageable and frankly inevitable in a healthy, brightly lit system. In small amounts, it is highly desirable if you keep grazing livestock like otocinclus catfish, nerite snails, or Neocaridina shrimp.
They just treat it as a snack.
Exactly. The management for green algae is largely mechanical. You use a magnetic scraper to clean the viewing pane during your weekly maintenance, and you let your biological cleanup crew manage the rest.
And if it gets out of hand...
If it's growing excessively fast, it might just be a signal to dial your light timer back by 30 minutes.
Manageable. I like manageable. But let's change the scenario. I just set up a gorgeous, pristine new aquascape. It looked like a crystal clear diamond for 2 weeks. And then I wake up, and suddenly every surface, the white sand, the rocks, the glass is coated in a rusty, dusty brown film. It looks like someone poured dirty coffee into my tank. What did I do wrong?
You did nothing wrong. You are experiencing the classic ugly phase driven by diatoms. Yes. Diatoms are fascinating organisms because, unlike most green algae, they build their cellular walls out of silica. Their shells, called frustules, are literally microscopic glass boxes.
Microscopic glass boxes. Where are they getting the glass to build these shells?
From your new tank. When you add fresh sand, new stones, or even just set up a brand new glass aquarium, there is a massive abundance of available silicates dissolving into the water column.
Oh, that makes sense.
Combine that unlimited building material with the fact that a new tank has an immature biological filter. The microbial community hasn't established dominance yet, and the diatoms simply explode.
So what is the prescription for the rusty coffee tank?
Extreme patience.
That's the hardest
I
prescription.
know, but diatoms are self-limiting. As the biological filter matures and the higher plants begin to actively grow, and more importantly, as the diatoms consume all the easily available silicates in the water, they literally run out of building materials.
The short plank again.
Exactly. They can no longer divide. The colony crashes, starves out, and fades away, usually within a few weeks. You can gently siphon them off the sand to keep things tidy, but drastically changing your light or photolyzers will only cause secondary problems. Time is the cure.
The ultimate test of patience for a beginner. All right, let's raise the stakes. I am looking at my tank, and my moss and stem plants are being suffocated by what looks like green cotton candy or long, slimy strands of wet hair. It's wrapping around everything.
Now, your dashboard light is flashing red. This is hair algae or filamentous algae. When you see this fast-spreading stringy growth, it is screaming at you that there is a severe disconnect between your available light energy and your plant mass.
This goes back to the buffet analogy.
Exactly. Hair algae is a massive energy sink. It requires high light and abundant nutrients to build those long, filamentous structures. If you have hair algae, it means your higher plants have stalled out, likely due to a nutrient limitation triggering Liebig's law or a massive lack of flow, and the hair algae is aggressively utilizing the excess light energy that your plants are ignoring.
So this isn't a wait-and-see situation like diatoms. This requires intervention.
It requires immediate, thoughtful intervention to correct the environmental imbalance. You have to review your light intensity, verify your nutrient dosing is comprehensive, and physically remove the algae mass.
Which brings us to the final, most visceral suspect. I look at my tank, and there is a thick, slimy blue-green blanket sheeting over the gravel and creeping up the glass. And before I even see it, I smell it. It smells like a stagnant swamp.
Oh yeah, the smell is unmistakable. You are dealing with Cyanobacteria, the imposter, the blue-green slime.
It's awful.
It is. As we established, this is not an algae. It is a photosynthetic bacteria, and biologically, it is one of the most successful organisms in the history of the planet. It is literally responsible for the great oxidation event that gave Earth its breathable atmosphere billions of years ago.
With respect to its history, but I want it out of my living room. Why is it there, and what is its biological superpower?
Cyano has a devastating biological advantage. Many strains possess specialized cells called heterocysts, which allow them to pull dissolved nitrogen gas directly out of the water and fix it into biological ammonia.
Wait, so even if my tank has absolutely zero nitrates in the water column, the cyanobacteria can just manufacture its own fertilizer from thin air?
Exactly. It can thrive in environments where every other plant and algae would starve.
That feels like cheating.
It is an evolutionary cheat code, but it has an Achilles heel. It is heavily linked to poor flow, low oxygen, and a buildup of excess organic waste. It loves stagnant, dirty environments.
The dead zones.
Right. If you see sheets of cyano, your dashboard is telling you that your tank needs a deep, methodical cleaning. You need to siphon out the detritus, clean your filter media, and radically improve the water circulation to break up those dead zones.
Okay, we know the biology. We know the drivers. We know the specific dashboard lights. So how do we translate this heavy ecological theory into a grounded, actionable management strategy? Like, how do I fix the tank without blowing up the ecosystem?
We implement a layered, methodical framework. It is not about a silver bullet. It is about establishing long-term structural stability. The very first mandate is to identify and correct the root cause. You do not start by aggressively scrubbing rocks. You start by analyzing the drivers.
Stop the bleeding before you clean the wound.
Precisely. If you have filamentous hair algae, you have to cut the engine driving the bloom. You drop your light intensity by 20%, or you shorten your photo period by an hour. If you have a cyano outbreak, you adjust your filter output to blast flow directly into the dead zone. You have to remove the environmental advantage the algae is exploiting.
And once the root cause is addressed, what is the next layer of the framework?
The second layer is to vigorously support plant health. I cannot emphasize this enough. The absolute best biological defense against algae is a thriving, dominant aquatic plant. You must ensure you are providing a comprehensive, balanced fertilization routine so your plants never hit that shortest plank.
This is exactly where I want to naturally integrate some of the incredible resources over at thetankguide.com.
Oh, perfect place for it.
Because telling a beginner to support plant health is incredibly daunting. I mean, you might not know the difference between an epiphytic anubias that feeds from the water column and a heavy root-feeding Amazon sword. You might not know what cation exchange capacity is when choosing a substrate. And the Tank Guide is specifically engineered to bridge that knowledge gap.
It is an invaluable ecosystem of information. It goes far beyond basic care sheets. The platform features deep, university-style educational blogs that break down the mechanics of different aquatic plants, the complex chemistry of active versus inert substrates, and the exact nuances of micro and macronutrient dosing.
It fundamentally removes the guesswork. If you want your plants to outcompete your algae, you can go to the Tank Guide, learn exactly what your specific plant species require, and build an environment that naturally suppresses algae through biological dominance. It's about building a robust defense.
Which segues directly into the third layer of the framework, environmental stability. We discussed how fluctuations in light or CO2 paralyze complex plants. Routine is your shield.
Consistency over perfection.
Absolutely. Consistent light schedules driven by digital timers, consistent feeding routines, not dumping a massive handful of pellets in on Monday and starving the fish until Thursday.
Guilty as charged.
Consistent disciplined maintenance, like performing a 30% to 50% water change every single Sunday to reset the organic load. When an environment is rigidly stable, the plants and the beneficial bacteria weave together into a tight ecological community that is incredibly hostile to sudden, opportunistic algae outbreaks.
Okay, so the environment is stable, the plants are fed, the timer is set. But I am still staring at a rock covered in green hair algae. The environmental tweaks prevent new algae. But how do I deal with the biomass that is already sitting there mocking me?
That brings us to the fourth layer, manual removal. You have to roll up your sleeves and physically intervene, but you have to do it intelligently, understanding the biology of what you are touching.
What do you mean by intelligently? Isn't it just scrubbing?
No. Many forms of algae, particularly hair algae, reproduce through fragmentation. If you just go in there and aggressively rip at a tuft of hair algae with your bare hands, you are tearing it into hundreds of microscopic fragments.
Oh no.
Those fragments float away on the current, land on a different plant leaf, anchor themselves, and start growing. You haven't removed the algae, you've just seeded it across the entire tank.
Oh wow. So how do you actually remove it without spreading it?
You combine physical agitation with immediate export. You use a clean toothbrush, twirl it into the hair algae to spool it up like spaghetti, and as you pull it loose, you hold a running siphon hose right next to it.
That's brilliant.
Any fragments that break off are instantly sucked out of the water column and down the drain. You scrape the glass while siphoning. You physically extract the biomass from the closed system. This immediately reduces the algae's footprint, allows light to reach the smothered plants, and prevents spore dispersal.
When we talk about manual removal, we have to talk about the biological cleanup crew, right? The automation. Snails, shrimp, specialized algae-eating fish.
They are a fantastic natural extension of your manual removal efforts. Amano shrimp are legendary for meticulously picking apart hair algae. Nerite snails act like tiny bulldozers, scraping tough green spot algae off hardscape. Otocinclus catfish constantly graze the biofilms on delicate plant leaves. But there is a massive biological trap here that ruins countless tanks.
Let me guess. The bioload equation.
Yes. The trap is assuming that animals are zero-impact cleaning machines. Every single snail, shrimp, or fish you add to your aquarium consumes oxygen and produces organic waste. If you have an algae problem and you panic buy 30 snails to fix it, you have just dramatically increased the organic load of your system.
Which, as we know from driver number 5, stresses the biological filter, drops oxygen, spikes ammonia, and ultimately causes a secondary, far more severe algae bloom. You are literally throwing fuel on the fire.
Precisely. This is another area where the interactive tools on the tankguide.com are absolute lifesavers. They have a highly calibrated snail stocking advisor, as well as a comprehensive general stocking advisor calculator.
Oh, I've used it. It's so cool. You plug in your exact tank dimensions, your filtration capacity, and your current livestock, and it runs the biological math. It calculates the exact number of cleanup crew animals you can safely add without tipping the ecosystem into an organic crash.
It allows you to model the biological impact before you ever spend a dime or risk the stability of your tank. It ensures your cleanup crew functions as a harmonious part of the ecosystem rather than a wrecking ball.
Informed decisions over emotional reactions. Which brings us to a topic we briefly touched on earlier, but we need to address formally in the framework. The use of chemical algicides, the liquid carbon bottles, the copper-based treatments. Why is reaching for these such a systemic failure of management?
Because of the biological cascade it triggers. Let's walk through exactly what happens when you pour an algicide like glutaraldehyde into your tank.
Okay, let's hear the ugly truth.
It is a highly toxic biocide. It physically destroys the cellular walls of the algae. Within 48 hours, the algae turns red, then white, and dies. Visually, your tank looks pristine.
You feel like a genius for 2 days.
But underneath the hood, the engine is tearing itself apart. You now have a massive volume of dead organic tissue rotting simultaneously. This mass decomposition rapidly strips the dissolved oxygen out of the water.
Suffocating everything else.
Exactly. Your fish go to the surface gasping for air. Your aerobic nitrifying bacteria begin to suffocate and die off. As the algae rots, it unleashes a massive spike of raw ammonia and dissolved phosphorus back into the water column.
So you have just instantly maxed out your organic load and flooded the tank with nutrients.
Exactly. And remember, you used a chemical shortcut. You didn't actually fix the root cause. Your light is still too intense. Your flow is still terrible. Your plants are still struggling from the chemical shock of the algicide. So a week later, the chemical dissipates, the water is saturated with ammonia and light, and the environment is highly destabilized. What happens?
The cyano wakes up.
The cyano wakes up, or a highly resilient strain of blackbeard algae takes hold. You trade a manageable green algae problem for a catastrophic, toxic bacterial bloom. You simply cannot buy biological balance in a plastic bottle.
That is a harsh, but incredibly necessary reality check. The desire for a quick fix is overwhelming, and it leads perfectly into our final section today. The human element. We know the biology, we know the drivers, we know the framework, but as human beings, we panic. Let's talk about the major mistakes we make when emotion overrides logic. What is the biggest trap?
The biggest trap is what I call the panic tweak. It is the total abandonment of scientific isolation.
I will raise my hand and admit I am completely guilty of this.
Yeah.
You come home on a Tuesday, you see a patch of hair algae that wasn't where yesterday, you feel this surge of anxiety, and you decide you were going to fix the entire ecosystem right then and there.
Yes, that's exactly it. You aggressively cut the light timer from 8 hours down to 4. You completely stop pumping in fertilizer. You reach your hands in and blindly twist the filter nozzle in a totally new direction. And then you perform a massive 75% water change, scrubbing every rock and uprooting half your plants in the process.
It feels productive. It feels like taking decisive, forceful action. Why is that so damaging?
It's like turning the steering wheel violently back and forth on an icy road. You are just going to put the car into a catastrophic spin.
Oof, great analogy.
When you violently alter 4 major environmental variables on the exact same afternoon, 2 deeply problematic things occur. First, you plunge your higher plants into profound biological shock. They are forced to simultaneously adapt to a radically new lighting paradigm, zero nutrient availability, and entirely different flow dynamics.
They just shut down.
They will completely stall out, handing the turf war directly to the highly adaptable algae.
And the second problem?
The second problem is a failure of data. Even if, by some absolute miracle, the algae slowly recedes 3 weeks later, you have absolutely zero idea which of your 4 massive changes actually solved the problem.
You learn nothing.
You learn nothing about the specific dynamics of your tank, and you cannot reliably replicate that success in the future. Ecosystem management requires the methodical isolation of variables.
One thing at a time.
Yes. You reduce the light intensity by 10%. You document it. You wait 2 full weeks and observe the biological response. If there is no reduction in algae growth, you leave the light alone and you slightly increase your potassium dosing. You wait 2 weeks. It is a slow, deeply scientific process.
Science over emotion. I will be thinking about the icy road analogy next time I reach for the light timer in a panic. All right, what is the next major mistake? We touched on this during the nutrient segment, but it's so pervasive it really needs its own spotlight.
The second major mistake is aggressive nutrient starvation. The instinct to starve the tank is deeply ingrained in hobbyist culture. But as we learned with Liebig's law of the minimum, dropping your macro and micronutrients to zero does not starve the algae.
It only starves the plants.
Exactly. It only starves the complex aquatic plants. You are systematically disarming your primary biological defense system. You must maintain a comprehensive, balanced fertilization routine to keep your plants in a state of vigorous, dominant growth. Never starve your defenders.
Do not cut the supply lines to your own army. Got it.
Okay, mistake number 3. This seems incredibly common with people transitioning into the modern, high-tech side of the aquascaping hobby.
Mistake number 3 is spiking the light too early. We live in a golden age of aquarium technology. The modern LED fixtures available today are incredibly powerful, capable of pushing massive PR values to the bottom of deep tanks.
They're like miniature suns.
They are. A beginner will drop a significant amount of money on a high-end light, set up a brand new tank, plant a few tiny, delicate tissue culture plants, and immediately crank that light fixture up to 100% intensity for 10 hours a day.
Because the logic is more light equals faster growth, right?
Wait.
I want a lush jungle by next week.
But the biology doesn't support that logic at all. In a brand new tank, those tiny tissue culture plants are experiencing massive transplant shock. They do not have established root systems. They lack the physical leaf mass and the internal enzymatic machinery to process that overwhelming volume of photon energy.
They're overwhelmed. They are essentially offline for the first 2 to 3 weeks while they acclimate.
And we know what happens when unused energy blasts into an aquarium.
You are creating an infinite, all-you-can-eat energy buffet for algae. The plants are stunned, the light is blinding, and the filamentous green algae simply explodes. You must always start a new aquascape with deeply dimmed, conservative lighting.
Like how dim are we talking?
Run the fixture at 40% or 50% intensity for perhaps 6 hours a day. Then, very slowly, over a period of months, as the plant mass visibly thickens and demands more energy, you incrementally ramp up the intensity.
It is exactly like feeding a child. You do not hand a newborn baby a massive ribeye steak. You start small, and you slowly increase the caloric intake as their physical capacity to process it grows.
That is a phenomenal analogy. You are pacing the energy input to match the biological capacity of the organism.
Which brings us perfectly to the final mistake on our list. Mistake number 4. And honestly, considering the culture we live in today, this might be the hardest psychological hurdle to overcome.
Mistake number 4 is expecting instant results. We exist in a society built entirely around instant gratification. You click a button on your phone, and a meal is delivered to your door in 20 minutes.
You download a movie in 10 seconds.
Right. We are conditioned to expect immediate feedback from our actions. But biology and ecology do not operate on a digital timetable. Nature does not care about your Amazon Prime delivery schedule.
Biology has its own intrinsic clock.
It absolutely does. When you make a thoughtful, measured adjustment to your tank, say you optimize your flow pattern, or you begin dosing a comprehensive fertilizer to fix a potassium deficiency, it might take 2 to 3 solid weeks to see a visible physical reduction in algae growth.
2 to 3 weeks.
Yes. The higher plants have to physically shift their internal machinery, build new cellular structures, and reestablish growth. The microbial colonies have to expand and restructure to process the organics. The entire ecosystem has to physically rebuild itself around the new environmental parameters.
And that 2 to 3 week waiting period is exactly when the human brain cracks. We wait 4 days, we don't see a miraculous transformation, we assume the tweak failed, and we hit the panic button again.
Exactly. If you lack patience, you are guaranteed to fail in this hobby. You will constantly be panic tweaking, constantly resetting that 2-week biological clock, locking your aquarium in a permanent, agonizing state of chaotic instability. Patience is not just a virtue in aquascaping, it is a fundamental biological requirement.
Nature does not operate on an Amazon Prime schedule. That is the defining quote of this deep dive. Let's pull all of these threads together. We started this conversation a while ago, putting ourselves in the shoes of someone staring at a tank covered in green fuzz or brown slime, feeling a profound sense of overwhelm, failure, and panic. But we have completely rebuilt the lens through which we view that glass box. Let's recap the core realization.
The foundational realization is that algae is not a parasitic infection, and its presence is not a moral failure of the fish keeper. It is a natural, ancient, and deeply inevitable organism that serves as an ecological dashboard light.
An indicator light.
Exactly. It is a real-time signal of environmental imbalance. If you can ignore the siren song of quick-fix chemical bottles, if you methodically fix the root environmental drivers balancing the light energy, providing comprehensive nutrients, stabilizing the carbon, optimizing the flow, and managing the organic load, and if you vigorously support the health of your higher plants, the algae will naturally and quietly recede as the ecosystem finds its equilibrium.
You identify the imbalance using the visual clues, you tweak one dial at a time, you manually remove the excess biomass intelligently, and then you sit on your hands and wait. It is a profound psychological shift. You transition from being a frustrated janitor constantly at war with a dirty glass box to being an ecologist thoughtfully managing a complex living system.
And I can promise you that is an infinitely more rewarding, deeply satisfying, and far less stressful way to approach the aquarium hobby.
It truly is. But as we established at the very top of this deep dive, we have only covered the foundational rules of engagement today. You built the framework. But there is one specific organism out there that seems to completely defy these normal rules. One specific form of algae that strikes absolute terror into the hearts of even the most veteran, battle-hardened aquascapers because of its incredibly complex biological relationship with fluctuating carbon dioxide and its sheer unrelenting resilience.
Yes. The final boss. Blackbeard algae, widely known as BDA. It is a highly specialized red algae that manifests as dark, wiry, almost impenetrable tufts of coarse hair.
It's brutal.
And it is notoriously difficult to eradicate once it establishes a foothold, primarily because it doesn't just rest on surfaces, it physically embeds its biological anchors deep into the cellular tissue of your plant leaves.
Just describing the way it embeds itself gives me anxiety. But we are not going to leave you stranded on the icy road. In part 2 of this special series, we are going to execute a masterclass specifically and exclusively dedicated to conquering Blackbeard algae. We will dissect the exact microbiology of why it thrives, how to perfectly stabilize your dissolved CO2 to shut down its growth engine, and we will detail the specialized targeted chemical and mechanical techniques required to physically extract it from your tank without destroying your delicate plants in the process.
It is going to be a highly technical, deep-in-the-weeds discussion, but an incredibly rewarding one for anyone serious about mastering their ecosystem.
So you absolutely must join us for that. In the meantime, if you want to start building that robust biological defense we spent so much time discussing today, I highly encourage you to immediately visit thetankguide.com. Dig deep into their university-style botanical blogs. Learn about the specific macro and micronutrient demands of your exact plant species. And please, use the Interactive Snail Stocking Advisor and the General Stocking Advisor calculators so you can optimize your tank's biological cleanup crew today mathematically the right way.
The foundational theory is critical, but those tools are what allow you to actually translate the theory into tangible practice in your own living room.
Exactly. So to wrap up part 1, I want to leave you with a completely new paradigm for your morning routine. Tomorrow when you wake up, take a sip of your coffee, turn on the tank light, and see a new patch of green fuzz on the glass or a dusty brown film on an Anubias leaf. Do not get mad. Do not panic. Do not reach for a bottle of chemicals. Take a slow breath, look closely at the tank, and ask yourself a simple question.
What is this microscopic organism trying to tell me about the world I have created for it?
Exactly. Is the light too intense? Is the flow stalling out in that corner? If you can learn to speak the language of the ecosystem, you will never be at war with your aquarium again.
You step out of the role of an adversary and you become a true translator of nature.
A translator of nature. You read the dashboard, you make the adjustment, and you find your Zen space again. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the ecosystem. We will see you in part 2.